So far, Battlefield 6 seems to be doing a lot right. At the very least, the groundwork for a return to the series' former glory has been laid here. One big question mark, however, was the single-player campaign. It always is. Since Battlefield 2042 was released entirely without a story mode, EA wants to build on the good old days of Battlefield 3 and 4, and the developers said this when they visited my friends at GameStar in their office in Munich with a test build of the game. Thanks to that, Jules was able to try out 3 campaign missions for about 2 hours. He really flexes that he didn't die even once, and that's why we can now tell you a lot about whether the Battlefield 6 campaign hits the mark. Following are my colleagues' impressions that I've adapted from German with a bit of a personal twist. Let's go. As we all know, the military shooter campaigns are always a mixed bag. Personally, I look forward to the Call of Duty campaign every year, a few hours of stuff taken straight from action movies, spectacular set pieces, scripted enjoyable elements, and fun gunplay. But honestly, not much of it sticks after it's all done. A small exception might be the last 2 Black Ops games, which dared to try some new things with the story, but this is precisely where it becomes clear what applies to almost all of these campaigns. Compared to the multiplayer mode, they feel almost like completely different games. Sure, the gunplay is comparable, but mechanics from the multiplayer rarely come into play in the single player. We mostly shoot our way from one linear scripted set piece to the next, with the exception of the new open combat missions in Call of Duty, which I personally didn't like that much. And I speak for both Jules and myself here. And let's not even talk about the story. The horrors of war are conveyed with stoic seriousness in the story, only for us to then face off against Snoop Dogg and Nicki Minaj in multiplayer. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point I'm trying to make is that this is exactly where Battlefield 6 comes in. The story campaign of Battlefield 6 is intended to feel like a logical progression of what we will later experience in the iconic multiplayer. And from what I can tell after these 3 missions, it's working pretty well. But Battlefield's moments in a single-player story? Like, how is that supposed to work? I'll explain that in a moment, but first let's have some context for the campaign itself. In 2027, the NATO military alliance is crumbling, and some European states are instead turning to the private military company called Pax Armata to guarantee their security. As part of an elite US Marine unit called Dagger 1-3, we fight against Pax Armata, who want to use their newfound position of power to change the global world order. If this description gives you the chills in light of current world events, it's understandable. According to the developers, however, the story's cornerstones have been in place for many years and are not intended to relate to any real events. Battlefield 6 is pure entertainment and therefore completely apolitical. Though it is an unsettling feeling in moments like this where the Pax Armata villain explains his resentment towards the USA. The campaign might not be commenting on current events, but when you mix fiction with real-life places, it's hard not to think about what's happening in the world. Beyond all that, we can't say too much about the story yet. Jules was able to play missions 3, 5, and 8 of the campaign. The developers roughly explained the main plot of the individual missions, but a conclusive overall picture did not emerge yet, and there's some things we don't want to mention to avoid spoilers. For example, for now it's impossible to say whether there is more to the members of Dagger 1-3 than the typical military shooter protagonist archetypes, nor whether the story will manage to emotionally grip us beyond the frighteningly realistic political drama. The developers also didn't want to make a definitive statement about the overall length of the campaign. We can only say with all the investigative journalistic certainty that Mission 8 was definitely not the last, so there will be at least 9 of these. Wow! Sherlock Holmes should be impressed. But back to the gameplay, and the teased question of why it really feels like Battlefield. At its core, the Battlefield 6 campaign is still a narrative linear story experience, but not in a corridor-like manner. In the mission called Operation Gladius, for example, we advance through the narrow streets of a city that has become a battlefield, having to neutralize enemy positions and getting tank support. We have enough room to allow for different paths and approaches, but not so much that it becomes a complete sandbox. It feels very similar to the urban combat on the Cairo map from the beta, and the stuff like the appearance of the tank is of course a scripted moment, but it fits so seamlessly into the battle that it could just as easily be one of my squad mates who just got the tank from our base. although it's driving much slower obviously. The individual members of Dagger 1-3 and the other soldiers on the battlefield are all divided into the same 4 classes that we also choose from in multiplayer, with a few creative liberties as the developers emphasize. In Mission 3 we're playing as the engineer Murphy, and we can repair the tank with the torch, or rather we have to do it because without the tank our progress would be significantly slower. In other campaigns it would probably not even be possible for a tank to be destroyed just like that. That would happen only in a scripted event if the mission required it. But here I feel like an engineer on the multiplayer battlefield, RPG rockets are hailing down from all corners, and you somehow have to keep this thing alive. The only thing missing from the true multiplayer experience is having actually 3 engineers constantly crouching behind the tank with torches in hand, and a sniper's raining hellfire whenever the tank driver suddenly rushes backwards because there's a different sniper with C4 in hand running towards the vehicle, and then obviously he succeeds. From mission to mission we will switch between the different squad members and thus play each class ourselves. We can however give commands to the other squad members with a short cooldown, allowing them to perform class-specific actions. The Assault Carter can blow up enemy positions with a grenade, Support Lopez covers our advance with a smoke grenade, when we're not playing as Engineer Murphy ourselves he shoots enemies with an RPG, and Recon Gecko has saved my butt countless times by marking all enemies in the vicinity, which turned out to be by far the most helpful ability, especially with all the smoke and debris in the area. I was really at a loss when I had to play as Gecko myself in a later mission and therefore did not have access to her squad commands. The firefights actually gain a bit of tactical depth through the squad commands, however I would argue that those who don't want to use them will also get by just fine on lower difficulties. Even without direct commands, the squad mates are really helpful and also take out plenty of enemies themselves. We therefore never feel like we're the only ones getting things done here. If our squad mates go down, we can revive them with the same mechanic as in the multiplayer. They also do the same for us, but only with a limited replenishing number of charges until it's finally game over. I mean, that's what it says in the document with tips for gameplay, because as Jules wanted to remind everyone here, he did not die even once. The squad system isn't as integral as in Brothers in Arms, shout out to those who still remember the series, but it still ensures a certain bond with our fellow soldiers. Once I was completely out of ammo and really in a jam, then a support stood in front of me, "Here, have some ammo." Another moment right out of multiplayer. I mean, supports are usually more of a team player type than medics, right?
I need ammo!
Oh, ammo!
Yeah!
Yeah, I have ammo!
Good! Can I have some?
Yes!
Mission 5, called No Sleep, takes place in New York and brings with it another tool that was just revealed for multiplayer, the sledgehammer. We sneak into an apartment complex and the game would probably prefer that I actually enter the next room through the door, but come on, we naturally smash the wall down and catch the enemies off guard. I admit it surprised me a little too, because I hadn't necessarily expected that the destruction from multiplayer would work the same way here. In fact, the sledgehammer allows us to significantly change the area even in narrow corridors, and thus create entirely new gameplay situations. I find it brave of the developers to give the player so much freedom here to torpedo the carefully staged enemy encounters. For a brief moment, I literally heard a level designer's eye twitching behind me, but I think they were happy that I tried everything. Though you have to remember that it's not like you can completely level the whole neighborhood, some walls just cannot be broken. The mission then continues with an action-packed chase through a subway tunnel, but for spoiler reasons, let's stop here. Mission 8, Operation Ember Strike, is probably the counterpart to Call of Duty's open combat mission. Only the somewhat Sandbox-like approach here seemed much more organic and pulled me out of the experience less than in COD. As Recon Gecko, we have a wide area full of enemies in front of us and have to clear 3 bases. How and in what order we proceed is completely up to us, and I mean whether you want to do this quietly or you don't care about alerting everyone. But honestly, if you give me a sniper rifle without a suppressor, what did you expect to happen? Loud or quiet, capturing the bases using squad commands, a recon drone, vehicles, and all the tools you have available in a Battlefield game felt well-rounded and satisfying. Basically a successful mix of sandbox and objective-based gameplay. Later we have to fend off the counterattack and use a guided switchblade drone launcher, and when I asked if we could also get it in multiplayer, the developers just grinned. As I said, we have certain creative liberties here. The 3 missions shown were all quite different and conveyed a good sense of the individual takes on the campaign. The approach of actually making a military shooter campaign that doesn't feel like a completely different game but tries to incorporate what players love about multiplayer into the single player is an interesting choice. For me, it worked really well in my 2 hours of gameplay, even if the story missions can never reach the level of chaos of a real Battlefield multiplayer match. They are definitely effective in being a teaser for what you will be experiencing for hundreds of hours with other players. Whether I will still remember the Battlefield 6 campaign in a few years depends on a few factors. First of all, how emotionally gripping is the story when you really experience it from beginning to end, and not just in 3 not directly related missions? How unique are the characters, and will they really make me care about their fate? And in terms of gameplay, how much variety will the Battlefield studios really deliver across all of the missions? Because that, in my opinion, is always a big plus of the Call of Duty campaigns. Every mission tries to be somewhat unique and delivers a new crazy set piece. We will probably only find out whether Battlefield 6 can keep up on that front in just a few weeks, because the release is just around the corner. And this is where Jules' impressions end, and I'll just add this from myself. For now, it seems like EA might be going in a right direction with their single player. I always felt like Battlefield did a worse job with campaigns than Call of Duty, but at the same time, DICE excelled at multiplayer elements, so I spent more time with this series. Looking through Jules' gameplay, it indeed feels like there's something here worth spending these few hours on. I will surely play through single player when the game launches in October. For now, the approach that Battlefield Studios have this year looks definitely much more interesting than what Black Ops 7 seems to be offering. So, are you interested in this year's Battlefield? Any hopes for the story campaign? And obviously, let me know which campaign in the series was the most memorable for you. I'd say that if I remember anything from the series' single-player missions, it's probably Battlefield 1, though Battlefield 5 has really cool moments accompanied by music. I think I gotta listen to Under No Flag on repeat again. Anyway, thank you for watching. Take care.